Any system which says, "This is a rotten world. Wait for the next. Give up. Do nothing. Succumb." That may be the basic lie. And if we participate in believing in it and acting, or rather not acting on it, we involve ourselves in the lie and suffer dreadfully, which only reinforces that particular lie. I'm Chris Spivey.
And I'm Eddie Webb.
And today we're here to break down at last the pinnacle of greatness, everything that is Blade Runner, in this quintessential episode covering the best television show to consider making itself a good show that would talk about Blade Runner through. I wondered how long you let me go on. I had like another good minute that I could have kept going.
I know that's why I played you off.
'Cause one of the things that I noticed that I do now, since Eddie can see me, is I ramp up the more I start going on a tear, and it's a very obvious
Mhm.
rant that you can tell it's either gonna be like a quick rant or, "Uh-oh, he's selling in. This is gonna be for a while."
We gotta cut that off at the pass. Um,
So,
so yeah, we're gonna talk about our Blade Runner perspective and also Total Recall 2070.
this is the thing that at the end of last episode, well, you know what? At the end of that other episode, because I may have convinced Eddie to put something in before this, who knows these days, is that I thought we needed to touch on Total Recall 2070 simply because it wants to be Blade Runner, but it can't be Blade Runner legally. And there's no other time that we'll ever discuss this show and it would fit better than in a Blade Runner slash cyberpunk retrospective that we're doing.
No, I mean, when you mentioned it, I was like, I didn't know anything really about the show, and I was like, really? And then I watched the 2-part premiere, and it's like, yeah, no, it was very clear that they had got the rights to one Philip K. Dick adaptation, decided they secretly wanted to make a different Philip K. Dick adaptation. So yeah, it's the Blade Runner-iest Total Recall show you could possibly make.
And all right, I'll speak up front. I know next to nothing about the background of the show. I considered researching it, but then as we rewatched it, because I watched the show when it first aired. And at the
Wow.
time, I watched it weekly because it was sci-fi, it was Blade Runner-esque enough, it was sort of like an addiction that you have for sci-fi and noir, and it was filling that addiction. It was like, I like, you know what? We'll make it a instead of an addiction. For me, this is more of a booze reference. It is, for instance, loving a 30-year-old like scotch or rye that's in the case and everything else, and it's fun, and you're sitting there and you're slowly sipping it and you're listening to someone play piano, probably Decker. And that is Blade Runner. Like that's 1982 Blade Runner. That is also Akira. That is Ghost in the Shell. And then we get to Blade Runner. So I'm sorry, Total Recall 2070,
Right.
and that is you with a bottle of Jim Beam. That is like the level that you've sunk to. It's not even acceptable, but sometimes you just want to have that taste, so you just suffer through it, and that's what Blade Runner 2070 is.
So it was interesting because I did not know until I literally popped the first episode in that this was originally a Showtime show.
Oh yeah.
So this is a pretty fascinating part of history because this is when Showtime was trying to get the same kind of clout as HBO. Um, Showtime, for those who don't know, Showtime was another cable network, much like HBO, that started off primarily just doing reruns of movies, and then it slowly started doing its own movies, and eventually started doing its own television shows because HBO had success doing extremely critically acclaimed television shows.
Like
And
Dream
so
On.
they that was not one I was thinking of, certainly, but
Were you gonna go with
I
something
was
more normal, like say The Wire or The Sopranos
on
or
those, right,
Oz?
the more iconic ones, yes.
I
Um,
like Dream On because no one ever thinks about it. It is a weird little show that ran for years.
well, that's the thing that's odd is like everyone remembers kind of the golden age, right? But HBO also put out a lot of crap.
Yeah.
And the reason why I also find this funny is because this was about 10 years after Showtime. No, it's Cinemax that did the Max Headroom show. So, like, there's been other kind of attempts to do what we now call original programming. Um, and so, like, except for 2 scenes, maybe 3 scenes in this, pilot, this also could have been, like, a sci-fi show, and, as in, like, SYFY, as in, like, budget cable, because it definitely has a pretty decent budget, but also it's so a '90s, science fiction show that was probably could have been rerun 5 times a week in 3 o'clock in the morning time slot kind of show.
I
It's not
I originally
necessarily
thought you were gonna
bad, but it
comment
certainly has an aesthetic. Mm.
I thought you were gonna comment that it was Showtime because of the brief glimpses of nudity that we get throughout the series.
Well, yes, I mean, I was gonna give us that more, in the breakdown, but yes, I mean, it's so forced, right? And we've talked before, Game of Thrones, like, how it felt like some of the stuff was kind of the nudity was kinda like, "Oh, this is the obligatory nudity." This is very obviously the obligatory nudity. We have to make sure in the first 5 minutes, this is a Showtime show because we could do blood and boobs, and then we kinda just forget about that for a good chunk of the rest of the 100, or 90 minutes or
All
whatever it
right.
is.
I'm not gonna make the comment I was gonna make. I'm gonna save that for when we get to the summary itself. But did you remember though that Stargate SG-1 started on Showtime, and they
I
also
actually
had the
didn't know
same
that.
thing
I
for
didn't know
that
that.
first season. I think the first season and a half, or maybe Showtime, because in that pilot episode it has flashes of nudity,
Hmm.
and then it goes back and it becomes less focused on that aspect of it, and eventually the Sci-Fi Channel, not Tiffy, picks it up, and that's when
Right.
we get the show that we know.
That's one of the reasons why it's so fascinating because, what as I understand what Showtime was trying to do, the HBO w so HBO was marketing towards on their channel and eventually towards DVD box sets. That was kind of their model. Was like, you watch a show on our cable channel, and then eventually we sell the DVD box set to you. Um, Showtime's goal was to do shows that about 50-ish minutes long, maybe a little less, enough they can cut out about 5 minutes of quote unquote objectionable material and then syndicate it. And so you mentioned SG1. I didn't know that happened, but that falls into the same model I knew about, which is that you make this show. If it doesn't do well, you can sell it and they can cut the bits out. Or if it does do well, then you can resyndicate it in a way where they're not necessarily watching Showtime, but we're still getting residuals off of it. And so again, that's why the feeling of forced is very intentional because we have to limit the amount of the stuff we do to a very specific amount of time on screen, so we can cut it out so that it fits right into a 45-minute slot with commercials.
I think it's a brilliant model. I don't know if it worked as well for them as it could have from some of the shows they chose to make. But Stargate, hugely successful, and if they're getting residuals from that, they're probably still collecting them to this day. Because
Right.
then you had like SG-1, you had Atlantis as a spinoff, and then I think you had some other spinoff and some random movies that happened. And then you bring in the Farscape crew at the end of Stargate to join the main cast, which made me giddy because I watched that in real time too.
Absolutely. And, now Showtime it's funny because like, they died, and then Paramount resurrected them, and now they're kind of like a Paramount brand. Um, it's wild, but, they're still making technically new shows, but the only one I'm skimming their list right now, the only one that anyone's probably heard of is the Dexter, spinoff.
Mm. The prequel for Dexter series, young Dexter,
Right,
who's hanging out with
Yellow
young
Jackets.
Sheldon.
Yellow Jackets is another one that's actually gotten some acclaim.
So they have a thing about serial killers and cannibals, if I remember the premise of Yellow
Which is
Jackets.
yeah, I think it is. Showtime's figured out, "Hey, this is our brand," I guess. It's like, "Alright." Um,
It's also a
but
lot different now, though, than when they were trying this in the '90s from just how many different networks there are, be they just purely streaming, be they still on the old cable model. There's so many now that it is impossible to make the kind of footprint you would have made before.
right, again, this is kind of a interesting time because, uh, 15 years previously, only the major networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, were making quote unquote new programming. Everybody else was basically syndicating or replaying stuff from either the US or that had aired before, didn't anymore, or from overseas. It's kind of, just but cable was really just, it was a way to get very cheap content. But uh, from the 80s to about the early 90s, there was this weird point where the US wasn't, these networks weren't making their own stuff, but they were doing co-productions with other studios. Um, for example, I've been rewatching the original Danger Mouse cartoon, and uh, that was something that Nickelodeon originally brought over as their first non-US show. Became very popular. So they actually co-produced not only, I think, the last 2 seasons of it, maybe, but also the Count Duckula spinoff was entirely because of Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon's like, "We want more of that. We want it to be 22 minutes long, not 11 ra or 5 minutes long," 'cause some of the Dangerous cartoons were like 5 minutes long. So
Are
we want
you
to be
only
specific.
rewatching Danger Mouse because I sent gifs of Danger Mouse and Count Duckula? I'm noticing I sent out that gif, and that's when I noticed that you started talking about Danger Mouse, and now you're watching it. So I will
To be
now take
fair,
full credit.
you should take at least partial credit because I had been idly debating it for a while. They said the gifts. It's like, actually, I kind of want to do it. And then I watched one episode online. And it's like, yeah, no, I'm just going to buy the DVD boxes. So I bought Danger Mouse one. I haven't bought the Count Duckula one yet because again, I have to see if that has aged well. Although I do
I don't
vaguely
think it
remember that
has.
basically the castle was functionally a TARDIS. So I'm probably going to be okay with it.
I don't think it's aged well, but I do remember it being hilariously bad.
Which I'm in the mood for right now is I'm in the mood for heavily recycled animation that is aware that it is working with limitations. But regardless, Cartoon Network did something similar, especially when anime became popular. Is they would often co-produce. We talked about this with Big O. They co-produced the whole second season of the Big O um, to try to get that because it was so popular, even though it was a flop in Japan. So we're in this weird stage where a non-broadcast channel actually doing new stuff was extremely rare. And HBO is like, it was a huge risk for them and it paid off very well. So now we're seeing people following along and they're like, and from what I understand, what little research I accidentally did on this show um, was that they got the license for Total Recall because they had access to a lot of old movies that they were replaying. And the showrunner was basically like, "Okay, but I really want to make a Blade Runner show." Like he doesn't even hide it. Like he says in interviews, "I was more inspired by Blade Runner than I was by Total Recall."
And why wouldn't you be? Come
Right,
on.
right.
No offense
So
to
that's
all
why
the
when you
people
first
that
suggest
love the
this,
Arnold movie,
mhm,
which isn't really Total Recall. But for all you people that love it, I'm happy for you.
I actually inadvertently rewatched that as well this weekend. My roommate was finding something to watch and just happened to throw it on. I was like, "Oh, actually, this is conveniently very good." So I rewatched it and it has nothing to do with this show. Just not a thing.
No, it doesn't even have anything to do with the book either, or the short
Right.
story rather.
Right, right. As I understand it, this is slightly closer to the original, story, which is we can remember it for your wholesale. Um, but also it is very clear, like, the fact that they chose to adapt one Philip K. Dick franchise or story by using a different Philip K. Dick story is probably more of a coincidence than anything else, because those 2 stories don't really have much to do with each other.
I think it is one of the most Dickian moves they could make. Essentially, they gave
It's a
us
dick move,
all God,
yes.
what was it? I said Dickian purposely. Essentially, they gave us all, ooh, let's get a little bit of a deeper Dick reference. They gave us all Choosy, and then we believed that it was Blade Runner while it was actually Total Recall. There you go. For any of you Philip K. Dick fans, there's
Right,
a little thing for all of you out there.
right, right. So anyway, so yes, I had no clue this was in that continuity, and then you suggested it, and I was just like, "Really? But okay," And then I watched it, and it's like, "Okay, no, I definitely see." in retrospect, I probably should have added this before, so I see why you wanted to add this in last minute because, it's like, this is very clear, Blade Runner. Like, I joked Max Headroom was Blade Runner on a TV budget. This is, Blade Runner on a slightly bigger TV budget.
So a behind the scenes bit, as if we have scenes anymore. I just think it's all on the
Right,
front stage with us at this point.
right.
Is that this series went through multiple iterations, and
Yep,
at the last minute is when we cut 2070. Like right before we started recording, it's like, yeah, let's just cut it to like
right.
make the run shorter for different reasons. And then after last week's talk, I decided we need to add it back. So that's why
Yep,
we've added it back last minute. If I was if I was originally going to leave in its original placement, I think it would have happened right after 20 Blade Runner 2049
right.
is where it originally was placed, which would have been just to give like an idea of how the movies had gone and then what the series had tried to do instead of sticking it between Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049.
Mhm.
Having said all
So,
that though, I like the flow of what we did better than having this inserted in there.
I think so.
If
I think it
anything, I
might
might
be
have
a bit too
moved it
much.
before Max Headroom.
Right, right. Although I am amused by the fact that there was a Blade Runner movie, then Total Recall 2070 was what if we had Blade Runner TV show, and now there's going to be an actual Blade Runner TV show called 2079. It's like, how much of that will also be inspired by this, I don't know, or if they're just drawing from the same set of inspirations, 'cause there's only so many different ways you can do a cop show that is basically Blade Runner. Um, but
Really? Eddie, could
yes.
we could talk about the other part of the run that we cut out that was essentially the Blade Runner-esque cop shows that really weren't Blade Runner.
I mean, if you want it to be okay, so Total Recall 2070 doesn't have to be Blade Runner, it's choosing to be Blade Runner, so it can also occasionally just not be Blade Runner if it wants to do other things. A Blade Runner TV show with the name Blade Runner on it, there's only so many different ways you can do that show because while still looking like Blade Runner.
You think it would get boring? 22 episodes, 5 seasons of just, cops hunting down replicants?
I think they have to do at least a solid season of that before they can start to play with the formula.
Wow, that would be obnoxiously boring.
I That's why I was shocked when they said they were gonna do a TV show. Unless that TV show is more like, say, True Detective, where that's all one long case.
Yeah, then that could be fun.
Right.
Now I just kinda wanna spitball ideas for the TV series and have, like, the 1st season not if we're gonna be honest, it will unlikely be 22 episodes. I think we're actually even the US model is moving more to, like, this round sweet spot of 13 episodes or something.
Right.
Occasionally, for successful shows, it would go off and be longer. It's funny how our talk about, 2070 and Cyberpunk has now turned to us talking about television, which I still
Yeah.
love. So if it was 13 episodes, that could be a great, like, full case, and then I think 2nd season, you'd have to start working your way into, like we'll use this show as a reference, Recall, and making that conspiracy come through 2nd season, and then
Right.
you can spiral out.
Right. I mean, if they do 2079, that's gonna be even further out from the 2049 movies, so, like, they can start to work into corporate intrigue a bit more, they can go into the outer colonies, which has never been touched in any Blade Runner spin-off franchise I'm aware of.
'Cause it's
There's other things
aliens.
they can do. Well, right, yes, we've talked about that. They are technically in the same continuity. Um, that would actually be funny if they could snag the alien rights as well, and then work aliens into Blade Runner. That would actually be really funny if they did that. But
I'd watch that.
I kinda would actually. But that's
Since
not what this
we
show
need to
is.
talk about this show, though, so I'm gonna, like, hard pivot us back to it. Before I do that, Eddie, how much Philip K. Dick have you read? Curiously.
Actually, aside from the 2 stories I mentioned, I don't think I've read too much past that. It's something that I've been planning to do, especially because, there's actually a great website called Standard Ebooks. I think it's just standardebooks.com. But what they do is they take works that are in the public domain and do beautiful EPUB formations of them. So they're actually very nice and readable. They do it in a bunch of different formats. And they have a collection of all of his short story work that were done for the pulps that have now fallen into the public domain. So I've been meaning to get around to reading more of
Nice.
that actually.
Very cool. Huh. Good to know. I may have to look into that myself then. All right. Are we ready to talk about the most 90s '90s show that ever 90'd.
Yes, yes, and then at some point in time, wrap up this whole season, but we'll see how that goes.
Oh, yeah, we at any point in time, we can stop talking about 27 and just jump into the recap of the series, so I'm not concerned. Much
Right.
like our audience, they're here to listen to our vibes and dig with the music that we're laying down. We're Lynchian right now, Eddie.
Not Dickian.
Now, no, God, I'd love to see that movie if that would've been possible. A David Lynch and, Philip K. Dick
I'll do
movie?
both payday.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, jeez. My brain would
Machine
explode.
Dreams Part 1. Those green eyes looking at the viewer. Very '90s opening credits. We zoom over the Mars skyline into a factory in distress. A lone hero trying to save it. Blaring sounds. He seals the oxygen canister leaks. Suddenly, a striking redhead in a spacesuit comes out of nowhere. She drops the spacesuit as our hero quips about being able to hardwire it. She peels off all of her spacesuit, revealing her birthday suit. Sexy time. I'm gonna take my break here to say that the redhead in this, I think, should have been the lead actress for this whole series.
Yeah.
Um, then we we get that it's just a recall vacation before the pair are killed. Hard jump to a pair of bored CBP officers, Iggy and Hume, talking about recall vacations and how expensive they are. Before we get a gripping laser gun battle and one dead cop. And before it ends, Hume, our protagonist, picks up the 12 millimeter and pours one out for Iggy. Get used to me saying the phrase at a 12 millimeter. You may note
And
throughout this sheet, it is
and
highlighted quite a bit.
and they say it like it's this gigantic gun, and it's like 12 millimeters tiny, man. The 12 millimeters is like like a shooter, like a pistol they use at shooting ranges, to like just shoot targets with. It's usually like a 22 millimeter, and so that's almost twice as big as their 12 millimeter, and they're making like this badass gun, and it's like it's not. 120 millimeter would be badass.
This is the best weapon in this entire series, Eddie. It is almost Blade Runner-esque in design when he picks it up and you're, "Oh, that's gonna be the gun."
And like that's one thing I will give this show credit for, is that at some point the people making the show realized we just have to just sell these bizarre concepts as hard as we can. Right,
Yeah,
because to be fair, there's a lot being thrown at the viewer in this. If you've never watched Total Recall, and this show does a pretty good job of telling you all you need to know if you've never seen the movie. Um, you have to understand false memories, the fact that international interstellar travel exists, androids, baroque weaponry, a police force that is done in a very different way than we're used to police forces being, all within 90 minutes. Only way to make that work is to just make it sound like it's awesome and believable no matter what you're doing. And so the fact is they just keep selling this gun like it's the most deadly thing ever. And it's just like, okay, I know a little bit about guns. I know this is bullshit, but they're they're committed to this. So it's like props for just like, no, the 12 millimeter. How dare you have that gun? Where is it?
but for a first 5 minutes of a show, this is a great opening hook. I
Yeah,
I I love it. Alright, so the reason I say the redhead should be the lead of the show, not only because she's beautiful, but she knew the assignment she had for this series when she
right,
got it.
right.
I'm not gonna say that our primary lead actress doesn't understand the assignment based on the episode we're watching. It could have a point later in the series why it's like that, but right now, for this pilot episode, person knows what they're supposed to do and brought it, much like the sorceress knew what she was supposed to do in Beastmaster and brought it.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, when I because I know a little about Total Recall, I was like, this has to be a recall memory because it's so cheesy. It's like the beautiful scientist who's very smart, but then also is instantly falls in love with the rugged, emotionless guy. And like, okay, this has got to be a Total Recall vacation. But right, she completely bought it, and weirdly, it was believable. Like for a half second, I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just this kind of show. And it's okay, no, no, I was right.
Yeah.
Because she completely got the guy playing the recall hero maybe didn't give as
Ugh.
much.
No. Though that's part of the thing. For most of our male protagonists in the show, I wouldn't switch any of them out because they're all that bland and boring.
Yeah, right, right. But, it's very clear this woman's, like, going, "Listen, you're gonna basically be a Bond girl in space," and she's like, "Got it," and she did exactly that.
It is interesting though that how they even at this drop though, at the start, they even give you different classes of androids, not just mentioning androids. Like they talk about the
Mhm.
beta class, specifically beta class android program protect human life. Random little exposition dump, but it's not a lot. It's just enough that you catch the phrase like beta class android. So maybe that might be important later.
Right, one thing that, because again, it's, for a show that's trying to grab your interest right off the gap, it certainly works, and it also does a pretty good job of saying, "We have a lot of information to get through, so we're just gonna put some stuff into dialogue now that we will explain later when it's relevant. Right now, it's not relevant." Android is the relevant word, not beta class. Those aren't the relevant words right now. Android is the relevant word. So we'll focus on that piece right now, and then later when beta class comes up again, you go, "Oh, I remember hearing that before." So for a pilot that has a lot of info dumping to do, this does a moderately good job of that. There are some points where it just can't avoid a certain amount of info dumping, but it makes at least an effort to try to pace that out through the entire two-part episode.
Oh. Anything else? Because I'm going to go at a slightly faster clip for this than we do most of them. In case we want to
Um,
talk a little bit more about the cyberpunk itself.
The only thing I was gonna mention, which I know she already put in your notes here, is that, they did build some pretty decent sets and then couldn't hire enough extras to fill them. So,
Oh yeah.
there's a lot of, like,
And
"Why does it have to be so big?"
but part of it is, you could almost say that was intentional, because if you go back and look at Blade Runner is beautiful, but it's never overly crowded or populated except for, like, very specific scenes where they put a bunch of people, otherwise it's just open.
Fair, fair. That's a good point.
So, it's not true, but that is what I'm the context I'm adding as a Blade Runner fan to it. I agree with you, they couldn't afford to hire people, but that's what it conveys if you're familiar with Blade Runner, though.
Right, except for I don't think they ever really have the scenes where it's heavily populated, at least in the 2 episodes I saw, so
Oh,
well,
um
the down below thing, yeah, that's below was
then we wander around the city for a bit of the metropolis, and we get Blade Runner-iest smashed together. This I'm gonna even pause. This is a scene where they put all their people running around in front of the CBP police station from different, I'm gonna use finger quotes, cultures, and they have like 20
right.
extras just running back and forth.
Fair, fair, fair.
This is their people scene. Uh, Hume is getting the runaround from his supervisor while trying to figure out how the android got those guns. Before recall security can leave with Dr. Gish, Hume deduces that the androids were after him. Callie, the assessor, lets Hume lie to him and leave with the 12 millimeter. On the street, Hume and Olivia, his wife, make out while talking about the case and his dead partner and how androids aren't supposed to hurt humans before we go back to their apartment for more on the glass sexy time. And we get an understanding of who has the best contract lawyers. Olivia grills Hume about the 12 millimeter.
The 12 millimeter. Um, yeah, it was because I watched Total Recall, the movie. It was fascinating to me because they had the scene where, they're scanning Hume and you see the skeleton, and you see the little gun kinda tucked in and lets it go. Then you watch Total Recall, which was done 10 years previously, had a similar scene where, he's walking into a quote "safe zone," and you see a skeleton walking by, and there's no weapons on it. And that scene was animated better in the mid-80s than this show in '99. Mhm.
Different budgets.
Well, I think also in that case, they probably hand animated all the stuff in the movie, whereas this was probably done with actual computer graphics, which were not quite there yet.
Are you kidding me? Did you see those opening credits? That was computer generated, Eddie. That was like top tier.
Yes, they figured out the color filter on Photoshop.
Uh, so there was a lot of exposition there. I am not going to give that the same kudos I did previously for the first 5 minutes because it tried to play a lot of different genres all at once. Tried to play the cop genre, tried to play like the noir, tried to play conspiracy and sci-fi on top of it,
Yep.
which is hard to do in and of itself, much less truncate it down and with okay actors.
Right.
But I'm stopping specifically for Eddie. If we were CBP officers and you died, when I met my wife on the street, I wouldn't talk about your passing while I'm making out with her and then to go home to do something. That it's a weird range of emotional spectrum of feelings.
It was this is definitely the scene where I was just like, "Here's the obligatory sexy time," because it's like, does your wife get off on your partner dying? Because that's really the tone that's coming across here.
Yeah.
I think the intent was, "I'm trying to reassure you," and it becomes sexy time, but the way it was acted, it really feels like, "Oh, that's so hot that he's dead."
Yeah. And uh, all right, I'm gonna move on. That's all I had to say about that whole piece. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it.
Fair enough.
Anything for that before we move on?
Well, it's just we have a small I think it's around here where, the CBP notes that, like, they're not at all equipped to actually handle these kinds of investigations. It reminded me a bit of, um, Demolition Man, where the police just
Mm.
are kind of they deal with, like, 1 murder a year or something ridiculous like that. And that's no, no, Demolition Man, they had not had a murder in several years. And it's kind of the same thing of, like, crime is so low that they're barely even a they're kind of just an adjunct organization. They're not police as we recognize them, even though all of the tropes and trappings are very much a police station. So it's kind of weird with that knowledge that I guess the head of the CBP knows that one of our officers has a gun, a licensed gun, and just kind of lets it go. Because if this is a gritty, corrupt noir world, okay, sure, whatever. But like when you have 2 homicides a year, it's like you think someone carrying a gun would be a pretty big deal in a society like that. So there's a lot of tonal whiplash, like you said. Yeah.
Okay, so Callie is not the head. Essentially, I'm from my understanding, the assessors are like internal affairs in the police department.
That's even worse then.
Yeah. Like that's what I wanted to highlight. Like that's their job. Internal affairs is what he's doing. So
Okay.
and it's since you did mention it, it is weird that they only have stunners, which I think is an interesting concept.
Hmm.
But yeah. Um at CBP, we meet Hume. We meet Hume's new partner, Farv. We get some banter between the supervisor and someone else. Their supervisor puts him on the front desk as the assessors hunt down the androids. The new partner deals with a wacky complaint until Soother, I think was how they pronounce his name, I don't remember right now,
Hmm.
are the Soother's brought in for an attempted kidnapping. They're from an irradiated Eastern Bloc area. They claim to have been on a vacation. Since then, his wife is depressed. They can't put any details together about their vacation, and they have no memory of using Recall. Hume checks, and Recall has no record of their vacation. The CBP duo go to investigate while Hume questions Favre.
Right. Now, granted, you became this going, this is a show that has strong Blade Runner overtones. I am accepting that may have biased me on this. Also, the trope of human and android slash alien cop is now well farmed in this time period. But I still knew within 5 seconds of Favre opening his mouth that he was an android
What? Favre is an android?
because he has that very specific Brent Spiner style of I'm not monotone, but my emotional register is pretty neutral, and therefore I'm going to talk like this in a way that could be human, but also is very clearly not.
Yes. This all right. I understand the importance of the subplot as it moves everything else along. This bothered me. Like, I don't know. I'd forgotten that this was part of the episode because it's been so long since I watched this. But like how it came in, how it's introduced, how it is ugh, sluggishly portrayed is
Right.
bah.
And like, so the whole time I was watching it, I was like, okay, I have to assume that they just know he's an android and there's not talking about it. But no, that's like a big cliffhanger moment in episode 2, and I'm like and they're leading up to it, I'm like, "Oh my" I mean, we'll get there when we get there, but, like, they lead up to it, and then it happens, and then it was like, "Oh my god, you're an android." It's like, "Wait, what?" Did everyone know? Because everyone's kinda acting like he was too. I mean, no one would seem to be confused on who this was except for maybe his partner, who is the person who spends the most time with him.
Mhm. I think the chief knows is who knows,
Okay, but still, it's
and that's implied, that's me guessing.
right. Um, uh, but especially when when the suitors come in, and they're clearly very agitated, and Favre is trying to talk them down, but is also clearly not understanding why they're upset. And I'm like, that's again, that's just none of it rang true. Um, I think if it was if it was supposed to be he was that was a big twist, he should act just like any other character. He should be just he could have all the same lines even, but his acting should have been completely human. There should be no no weird nuance to it. And then it would be like, oh my god, you acted just like a human. But the audience is very clear. It's like, no, this guy's not right. And even the suitors were like clearly confused at what he was doing. So like it was just complete lack of surprise.
And it's trying so hard to be Blade Runner right now. I can see flop sweat coming off of the show at this point. We're just trying to act like was being wants to be Blade Runner. At the start, it was doing it without trying, which was amazing. Here, it's like, come on, we got to keep going. We got to keep going. We've still got over an hour of show left to put together.
Right. And what's hilarious is like whenever the show needs to kind of obligatorily pretend it's actually a Total Recall show is when you see that stress the most. Because this
Mhm.
whole scene is talking about recall, but you shouldn't take a recall vacation, and they really hammer home. It's like we didn't go to recall, but we had this vacation. We don't remember. It's like, okay, so you had recall, but no, we didn't. And it's like, no, even the audience is like, okay, no, you obviously clearly had a recall vacation. And again, similarly, at the end of it, oh my god, that was all false memories. Yes, we all knew that. So a show that's ostensibly supposed to be a mystery, its two big mysteries are not mysteries at all. We know that in the scene, we know the answer to both those mysteries, and it's like 15 minutes into the first episode.
Ridiculous. Um, During the investigation, the duo uncover the android's hideout, and another epic gun battle ensues. And we get more
Woo.
12 millimeter action. Pow pow! During the fight, we learn that Far is an android, but we don't because they literally shoot him in the shoulder and white stuff comes out. Forensics uncover a disc and drop some exposition about Olivia before Callie rolls in and takes the 12 millimeter. Then we get some banter about loyalty and giving up rights for a safer world. Callie sends human Favre to recall for more clues. Richard Collector recalls head of security, admits to sending Gish to Mars. We get our first real big Mars reference, and so we can't be questioned. The CBP pair futilely attempts to get some answers to no avail. Hume learns recall no longer uses disc, but they won't reveal anything else. Favre undergoes recall, showing they don't use disc or implants. Back at CBP, the coroner is dissecting the android Hume terminated the previous evening with the 12 millimeter.
And
Eddie's eyes are
again,
rolling
like,
so hard every time I say 12 millimeter. It is the best.
no, that's the funniest part of this whole thing. Um, no, but like again, like Favre has a scene like they're dissecting the android, and Favre's clearly ill, and they're like, "Oh, it's just an android. Get over here." It's like, "No, I'm recovering from my wound. I have to go." And it's just like, "Oh my god, of course, because he doesn't want to see an android because he's an android." You know, it's so obvious. And the whole time I'm going,
Oh,
"Okay, I know how this stuff is structured, so these clues are so obvious. Clearly, the twist is that he's not. He's just a weird human. That's got to be the answer." And it just wasn't. I was just like, really? Because it would have actually been really cool if, like, all this time, Farr was just a weird guy, you know?
yeah. But then it would not be a Blade Runner show, though. I'm sorry.
Right.
It's not Blade Runner. It's Total Recall. I apologize.
Right. And I think this is the only reference to the idea that this is somehow in continuity with the movie because the movie did use discs. And so it's
I
like, we
don't
don't use
remember.
discs anymore.
Okay. Thank you. I
There was a
did not remember.
There was a subplot in the movie where, they're trying to get the disc with information around, and so that because it was implanted in Arnold Schwarzenegger's head, because he is a secret agent. And oh, it's funny, like trying to explain the actual plot of Total Recall sounds like a 5-year-old trying to explain a story to you. Because, like, he's a construction worker, but then he pretends to be a secret agent, but it turns out by being a secret agent, he actually reveals he secretly was a secret agent, not actually a construction worker, but he still thinks he's a construction worker even though he previously was a secret agent. And, like, that's actually the plot of the movie, but it sounds like someone on Ritalin trying to explain a fever dream they had.
Oh, I've seen that movie once, and that's all I will ever see it.
Right.
Anything else about this bit? Because we get some banter, we get some world lore drops about, like, different type more like, service androids and how they're supposed to behave and things like that.
Is this the scene where we have the weird Mortal Kombat game in it?
Where Favre is, skiing downhill?
No, the one where, they put the headset on and,
Not
you
yet.
see 2
Not yet.
fighters? Okay, we'll get there.
Not yet, because this is also we find out about their I think this is where we find out about the kidnapping of the kid. Is this scene
Okay,
2?
right, right. Okay.
Because they put Mr. Soother under the recall treatment.
Yes, right, okay.
I can't believe I'm the person that recommended we watch this. So anyway, they find out about the missing kid. All right, I'm gonna give you the quick synopsis version. Hume and Callie eventually connect. Callie gives Hume back the 12 millimeter.
Huh.
Olivia calls telling Hume to treat the androids like people because they discover where some of the androids are potentially hiding out at. He protests before leaving, and we get our rooftop scene, not like Blade Runner at all, but a rooftop scene.
Not at all.
Hume wants to know who did this and to put him away. And to put him away, the 12 millimeter pops up. The android says, "Please kill me." Hume refuses to kill him, and then the CBP somehow have big guns and they shoot him and kill. Nope, they shoot the android. They don't shoot the android. The android, in fact, leaps off the roof. That is how much I don't want to deal with this scene. Is that my brain is blocking it out?
Right, right. And, like, there's a moments where the show walks up to an interesting concept of the if you treat people if you make androids like humans and they treat them badly, they're going to rebel, which is, it's not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something that the closest the show has so far to this is an interesting concept, especially if you layer that with false memories. Because we've seen in our watch through the what happens if you implant memories into someone as a way to try to control them. So, like, again, it's a potentially interesting concept here, uh, but no one involved in this show seems to understand that this is supposed to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it is. It is so dull. Like it is painfully dull. The acting is there's subpar, and then we have like the acting that's here that's lower. And for me, it's extra frustrating because we have not delved into it potentially how we might have earlier, but the underlying enslavement narrative that runs throughout Blade Runner,
Right,
and to see it just so boggled here makes me not want to talk about this piece of the show at all.
right. Yeah, I mean, especially considering if you because we've talked before, the original Blade Runner movie, Decker was reluctant to engage with this. So it kind of skirts over the relationship that police have in enslavement narratives. And in Kay's case, he was also a slave that was forced to do this. So again, we're closer to that. We started thinking a little bit, but still generally it gets away with it. Here it has neither of these options, right? So the
Mhm.
police are actively involved with propagating enslavement. They are reinforcing status quo where it is important that people own other people, even if they're artificial.
Yeah,
And the show has a fantastic opportunity to engage with that, and instead goes with a very bland shootout.
and it's not even that. It's the fact that then this being that's fighting sentience kills themselves
Yeah,
essentially,
right. So
which saves your cop from having to make any sort of like moral decision whatsoever. And it makes the CBP people that are there not the villains because they didn't kill this person. But we've seen them like shoot down other people, but they were in combat then, so that's different versus now.
Right. And this goes to the point you're making before about the info dumping because the conversation he has with someone I don't remember who, um, I think his wife is like, hey, you should maybe have you thought about treating my people and whatnot? And he's like, no, I hate androids because that's my only character definition. Um, because I hate androids, and it so you have other characters basically explaining the theme to the protagonist, and it's fine if the protagonist doesn't want to engage with the theme. I mean, lots of great Decker hates replicants, but the point is that there needs
I
to
wouldn't
be
I wouldn't even say Decker hates replicants.
well, but I bring it up as an example, right? Right. The point is like,
Yeah, okay.
Decker certainly is not sympathetic to replicants at the start of the movie, and is at
Oh,
the
no.
end. Let's at least go there, right? So like, it's fine if you're like, I this is a theme that we want to explore, and the protagonist doesn't want to engage with it because eventually the arc is they will engage with it. That's the point of it. Um, but we don't have that. We have the everyone seems to know that his partner is an android. He's completely oblivious to this, even though he hates them. And so what happens as a result of those choices is that now he seems to not be angry at androids. He seems to be angry at slaves. And that makes it even worse as a result. Because what's functionally happening is, and let's be blunt here, the pretty white woman is trying to protect the slaves, and the man is going, no, I'm going to murder them. Do
Yeah. So, yeah.
you want to just
Anything
skim
else
through
about this
episode
before I
two?
move on?
Did you want to just
Anything
skim through episode two?
well, maybe episode 2 gets better, you
Okay,
never know. And I'm not delving into it how potentially we would have in the past simply because it is not good enough to warrant that.
fair enough.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm the one that suggested it because it fit in the model, and at some but there's some points to it that are still relevant for the cyberpunk conversation that we want to
Sure.
have because it's 90s trying to figure out how to deal with cyberpunk and also make something engaging. They just botch it.
Yeah.
Machine Dreams Part 2, exterior CBP, multicultural? Maybe? Look at all those people.
Yeah.
Olivia and David talk about a soldier android killing her father. She works for Uber Braun and doesn't think that ugh, that David understands just how serious this is. Callie rolls in, wanting to know how recall is involved. David breaks down the episode 1 plot, but they have no evidence. The chief says they'll put Suter into a sorry, this is where we found out about the kid, into a deep
Okay.
hypnotic state, and we learn that Callie used to work for the collector at Recall. Recounting his story under hypnosis, he recalls Spencer Martin offering them a recall vacation and remembers his missing son. Uh, Davo or Tavo, I'm not sure in the pronunciation. I want to say Tavo is telepathic and his family was tricked into bringing him here. Now, with images of both the boy and the kidnappers, the CBP officers brief the chief and we get some more world lore for the Dickverse. We learn Martin used to be a programmer at Recall.
Right. Um,
Do you not like the Dickverse, Eddie? Is that what I'm getting from you?
no, Divorce is great. I because this whole show is about dick moves.
Are
Um,
are you not moved that I waited to this point in time to even put that in my notes? I could put it anywhere during this
I
document.
know you waited for this deep in. Anyway, uh, no, I mean, so uh, the other problem I had, there's lots of problems talking, but one of the ones I realized when I started watching episode two is that the suitor subplot really feels like padding at this point. I will give the show credit. It does try to give a reason near the end of this episode as to why this subplot exists.
Yeah.
But at this point, it feels like they're basically these are two episodes that got interwoven together because it needed to be a two-part pilot.
Yep. because that's how pilots used to work back in the day more than they do now, is that you would have almost a movie that would be the kickoff for your series.
Right. It was very much requirements. But I will say to this critic, some of those times when that happens is they literally just shoot a movie and they chop it in half. This one is structured like 2 episodes. So like you point out, they do relatively quietly recap all of plot 1 part 1 in case you missed it.
Yeah. All right. My question for you, Eddie, is when you're writing a script for a show
Yep.
and you know you have limited cast,
Yep.
how do you decide what skills your scientist has to be a scientist? Because so far,
Oh, all of them.
our it's been a coroner, a forensic scientist, a hypnotist, and I think she did something else too along the way. So far, at least 4 distinctive career skill sets up to this point for her, which makes me wonder, why isn't she the lead of the show? Because 'Cause I'd rather watch that show.
So last time we talked about Max Headroom, you were upset that there were 2 different scientists on this show. And you're like, you should combine them all into one scientist character and just get rid of Bryce. And now they have done that. They've combined all the scientists ever into one scientist character. And now you're unhappy with that option too.
But see, Bryce was not really a scientist. Bryce was a computer hacker. That was his thing. And so then they had Amanda Pays' character also be a computer hacker. That is the same skill set. This woman has 4 different skill sets, 4 different characters.
She
And you
clearly
know
has
what?
multiple degrees.
This show could have dealt with having more people in it, unlike Max Headroom, because there was enough plot to go around. This show has too much plot.
Well, no, I bring it up as a joke, but yes, you're right. I mean, with Max Headroom, they had basically one concept they kept trying to retread, and so they could have made a leaner cast and used extra time to develop characters more. In this case, there's so much going on that we can't. Every character has basically one note. The guy who's the android, the guy who hates androids, the scientist who tells you scientist stuff. There's like that's all they have. A character. The wife who is scared for her husband, but not really. I mean, all of these characters just have vague notes, like an index card character briefing. So you're right. Like this is another way we're actually um, having. Frankly, if they had had more androids on the show, like have more have one human scientist and all the other scientist parts are just androids regurgitating lines. They have no personality. They're androids. It's fine. They don't have to have
Oh,
personalities.
that'd have been
And
brilliant.
then let the lead character who hates androids constantly be butting up against them. That would have been more interesting, I think, because it's the, I need this information, but I hate androids, and let that play out a bit more.
Yeah. Instead of just having an android that brings him coffee that he can dismiss without having to pay any
Right,
attention to.
right, exactly.
Yeah. And look frustrated when they offer coffee.
Mhm.
Ugh. So that was a lot of the plot and everything else that you've missed up to this point. We also learned that David and Olivia's marriage is in trouble, trying to give you some depth to their characters right there.
But
And
they
I
were
even
having
have a
sex
note here.
last episode.
Come on, Eddie. Everybody has sex. That's just kind of a given, regardless of states of marriage. Which there's like so many jokes I can make now about androids. We do learn. Sorry, not even learn. I was going to make another joke. I made my comment earlier about the redhead at the start having Sorcerer's energy, and I didn't realize I made a note here for myself that says Olivia needs to bring Sorceress from Beastmaster energy to this role. That is how
Yep.
deadpan she is, which from the pilot is frustrating. If memory
Yeah,
serves, because I'm never going to rewatch the series again, I think there's something related to recall for her character.
of course.
So it could be them trying to seed the plot, but it's not working.
It doesn't help that. So all we know about these two people are she apparently gets off on his partner dying, and so they have sex. Now they're having trouble with their marriage, and then to jump the ends, they don't have trouble with their marriage anymore. She kind of sort of forgives him, and so there's just they're trying to cram, like you said, way too much into here. And you're right. I mean, she really just needs to. She's so milk toast. She's supposed to be the quote unquote goods woman compared to all these other less good women. But she just really needs to bring just more manic energy to this, frankly.
All right. I don't think you're going to be opposed to this. So I'm going to recap the entire thing right now in about 30 seconds and we can talk about it. Then we can try to move into wrapping up the entire Blade
Sure.
Runner run. Because I think it was important enough that we added it. But even as we're talking about it,
You're
I'm
getting bored just
losing
talking
interest in the
about it.
show. Because I don't want to drag it, which is we're getting to the point where we're about to start. I don't know about you, but I'm getting to the point where I'm just going to start dragging the whole thing. So essentially, what we learn is that the suitor's kid was telepathic, and he's been kidnapped by androids who want to get a secret from Gish.
Right.
We get another big shootout with the 12 millimeter, where
Oh
they
god.
don't get to kill any androids, but then they go to Mars, and on Mars they manage to save Suitor. The head of Recall, shockingly, then kills the androids who Hume was talking down, and kills Suitor, but doesn't kill the 12-year-old telepathic kid. They go back to Earth. The Suitor family and their kid are about to leave. That's when Recall shows up and says, that kid was in Suitor's mind. He has our IP rights. Once again, saying that IP is the deadliest thing in the universe.
Right.
Um, then you get the fact that maybe the Suitor snuck out while the Recall people were distracted, but you're never shown that.
Mm.
And Hume and Favre walk out into the street. Hume now knowing that Favre is an android because it comes up somewhere as a big shocking moment that Eddie mentioned earlier. And they shake hands saying, "You're all right." And then we get more making out between Olivia and David. End of
Right.
show.
Right. Um, so with all this going on, they also introduce telepathy, and they one of the few things the show is subtly doing, is because they constantly reiterate that these suitors are from the irradiated Soviet bloc. And so they keep kind of mentioning that their home is irradiated, and then their son has psychic powers. They don't directly draw a line between these 2 points. So one of the few things the show started doing is like, but hey, maybe being irradiated leads just to psychic powers. That's a common trope in sci-fi.
But they do, because they literally say that like Recall acquires most of its telepathic and special people from that zone. Like that is
Oh, I missed that. I missed one parts where I blanked out because I was so bored.
I fell asleep
Um,
a couple times, but I woke back up and I rewound.
fair enough.
I I I recommended we watch this, by the way. And but I'm glad they did add that because if you read Philip K. Dick, psychic powers are a large part of the work and the worlds that he creates. And
Right.
it's like commonplace and normal. It is a business for having it. And there's like different gradations of psychic powers to get you more money. And it's quintessential Dick.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of the Johnny Mnemonic movie in the sense
Mm,
that the Johnny Mnemonic movie was a mix up of 2 or 3 of Gibson's, not quite any of his 3 different stories, but lots of bits and pieces of 3 different stories to put together into kind of more homogenous universe.
yeah.
Um, with the small exception of the Johnny Mnemonic movie is actually halfway decent. But I see, like you said, you joked about it, but this whole show feels like it's basically kind of let's do a Philip K. Dick show. Let's just take all of Philip K. Dick's stuff and tie it together as if it were one big universe. It's not a bad concept. Well, I mean, not a bad concept inherently. Philip K. Dick stuff is intentionally weird.
Psychedelic.
So trying to reconcile it all is a bit of an odd choice, but I could see how the thought process got to here. It's like, we have this great author, so many different people have done adaptations from this. Used to recall as a launching point to bring in other Philip K. Dick stuff and make it to a big consistent universe. It's not a bad idea.
I
Um,
think it's a great idea. It's just that you need to have the IP rights to all of it to be able to do
right.
it. You can't try to like sneak your way in through one IP and steal other pieces because you have to attempt to stay so coherently true to one specific thing that you lose any of your ability to bring in the weirdness and make it more engaging. And they tried to say we're making Total Recall and still Blade Runner.
Right. Right. Um, and I was gonna do a long diatribe lambasting the very obvious autism coding and how that has aged very poorly. Because the kid has to play the video game before he can use his psychic powers, which means that he has to engage with special interests before he can do anything useful to the people around him, and how ugly and disgusting that is. But suffice to say, that's just the '90s. So I'm not gonna spend too much stick on that. Uh, but it's
Like,
the
a
whole
note that I didn't read is I think
Mhm.
within the first 20 minutes, I think I even have a note, they make a reference or a joke about mental illness 4 times in the first 20 minutes of this show. First
Yeah.
episode.
Mhm. Right.
So it's there. It's
So, like, the whole thing, I mean, I'm not even mad at this show, right? It's just a mess. And I talked glowingly about Max Headroom, which is also a complete mess. So, what is different about this show? The obvious answer is I didn't grow up loving this show, so that's a big part of it. I fully expect that a lot of my love of Max Headroom is purely chalked up to my specific weird nostalgia. Um, but even that, like, I watch this show and I see 3 completely different shows that are half decent inside of it, and that's the problem.
mhm.
But I think to larger point, and larger point of this whole run is that this show looked at Blade Runner and said very clearly and intentionally, "We want to do that," and missed what made Blade Runner special, which, to be fair, Blade Runner also was a mess of a movie. Um, a lot of these things we're talking about were messes on some level, um, but
But
they
a show like this, though, has had time to see why that was a mess and watch
right,
the evolution of cyberpunk, of the Blade Runner mythology, and had the ability to make their show less messy. And Blade Runner didn't have that. Ghost in the Shell didn't have a lot of time to do that, and Akira certainly didn't have the time to do it, but Akira was based on something else that was massive and evolving. So that's not a good I don't wanna say excuse, but, like, a good reason why this show couldn't have corrected course.
right, and I think that leads to why the Blade Runner alikes are in a way fascinating is because when we first pitched this, it was gonna be originally it was just '90s cyberpunk, and then it kind of evolved and changed, and it became this, "Let's talk about all things that stemmed from Blade Runner," because that's not exactly the same thing. If this show had specifically reoriented and said, "We're gonna be a cyberpunk show," um, there's a lot of things you can ditch and reorganize to make it that, and it would probably have been stronger, but it probably also would not have been a Blade Runner show.
Hmm.
Uh, because at this point in time, we talked about this before, Blade Runner slightly predates cyberpunk as a term. So it is kind of a grandfather of cyberpunk rather than a father of cyberpunk. And by the '90s, cyberpunk had developed its own very specific aesthetic and look and set of tropes that Blade Runner didn't quite match up to anymore. So it's not trying to be a cyberpunk show, unlike Max Headroom, which was like more trying to be a cyberpunk show. Um, this is the no,
Did
we're trying to make a Blade Runner show and talk about those themes, but then it doesn't quite nail those either because it doesn't quite know what those themes are.
I guess a sidestep to make it more of a cyberpunk discussion. Do you know when the term cyberpunk was first used coined?
Um, so I recently read the introduction to this Mirror Shades anthology, which was released in 1985. Um, and so it's the introduction written by Sterling, I want to say, who was one of the original cyberpunk authors. And he talks about how in the late '70s to 80, 81, they didn't really have a term for what they were doing. They were kind of calling it new wave sci-fi for a while. Some people talked about globalized sci-fi, um, uh, things like that. But they knew they're doing something new to contrast to golden age science fiction, which is very prominent in the '50s and '60s. They didn't quite have a term for it. What they noticed, however, which is where the anthology comes from, is that all of the stories they had written, for some reason, involved mirrored sunglasses.
Hmm.
Um, and if you look at some of those early stories, there is a direct line to cyberpunk, but they are not what we would classify as cyberpunk. Um, uh, One of them is the most iconic one is Wim Gibson's Gernsback Continuum, which is the story that usually is the lead of any cyberpunk anthology that talks about the history of cyberpunk. A lot of people recognize it as that's the genesis of it. But the actual story is about a guy going around photographing 50s era architecture for a photo book, and then accidentally slipping into a world where that retrofuturism became the actual 80s. So his 80s and retrofuture's projected 80s kind of overlapped onto each other for a while. Um, so that doesn't read very cyberpunk to us. So the term cyberpunk came around 84, 85, and was retroactively applied to a lot of things that did not identify as cyberpunk. So I think of it like first wave, second wave. You know, first wave cyberpunk is before it gained that moniker. Second wave cyberpunk is when it explicitly had that moniker and said go for it. And then of course there's obviously a post cyberpunk. Um, so, bleh. But anyway, so Max Headroom would have fallen into that era of cyberpunk became codified as a term, but was still maybe not completely fossilized, right? Uh, the cyberpunk tabletop role playing game was like 89. Shadowrun was around the same year. And that's when these things start to more coalesce into things we recognize. And then we have 90s cyberpunk, which is now we're trying to do things specifically, you know, referencing and homaging these things. So that's kind of your third wave. The form has been found, the tropes have been established. Now we're trying to build in that space. So all the stuff we've watched, Akira, kind of in a strange liminal zone in the sense that the manga predates Cyberpunk moniker, but the movie postdates it. So it's kind of a strange space. I generally more or less put it into the before time. Ghost in the Shell very clearly after Cyberpunk been codified, and you could see the changes in it. Technology becomes a little more prevalence. The
So
antagonist is now inside the technology is a bit more of a prevalent.
with Akira, I want to take a minute for that. Then it started before, but the movie happens after it started, and the manga ended
Yes.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So then, how would you describe? Having not read all of Akira. Um, what is the evolution of Akira based on the cyberpunk changing? Did Akira, the manga itself, sort of evolve to become more cyberpunk-esque during its tenure?
Interestingly, it becomes less, uh,
Hmm,
because it becomes more of a post-apocalyptic story. The second half of Akira has more akin to Walking Dead, honestly, in the sense that an event has devastated the city and different factions pop up and try to fight each other for resources.
okay,
So it is more post-apocalyptic in structure. Um, but because of that cyberpunk starting point, some of the themes that have evolved, like style and the use of technology on a personal level, and the blending of uh, lower class people with science fiction concepts, those are still all present, but they're not as amusingly, they're not as codified as tropes as the movie is. But because the movie's much more well known and recognized, that's where we draw a lot of, like, the bikes and um, drug using and whatnot. Those dragged forward and become part of that gestalt of concepts, even though the second half of Akira kinda goes in a different direction. Even though it's all logical outgrowth of the first half of Akira, it doesn't feel bolted on. There is a time skip, but it all feels like it's
mhm.
natural growth of the original part of the story. Um, so that leads us to, 2049. I'm skipping over 2070 for a second. But 2049 is much more okay. Now we're now post cyberpunk. So weirdly, because of the long time period between Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, it doesn't have to engage with the collection of cyberpunk tropes because we've already moved past them. So the time period
Okay,
where it could have been rebooted, it would have probably felt more inclined to engage with those, but instead, because it took so long, you can actually dig into things that made Blade Runner distinctive. And even though we didn't like it as much, none of us were arguing the fact that it doesn't feel like it's a continuation of the movie. Just how successful and how good it was is up for debate, but it did feel like it was a continuation. So it's not a cyberpunk movie; it is a Blade Runner movie, and those are distinctive. 2070 is caught in the middle of all of these forces. It's trying to be a Blade Runner thing while also caught in a time period where cyberpunk is an understood thing, and also trying to be having to do a what feels like a legally required amount of Total Recall to make it justifiably a Total Recall show, um, and kind of doesn't hit any of them. But it is, even though we kind of skim past it, and thankfully right to do so. I'm glad we did it because it is good to use that as a basis for talking about what all of this means. So let's talk about the CBP, for example, right? Um, the corruption of higher level institutions is a pretty common trope of cyberpunk as a genre. That's something that comes up a lot in particularly second wave cyberpunk, but even in first wave cyberpunk, the idea that you can no longer trust the people in charge to have your best interests in mind. That was one of the big shifts away from Golden Age science fiction. Because Golden Age science fiction was very much like, as long as we had a good scientist at the realm, he can lead the future into a glorious utopia, which is not at all fascism. And then uh, people is like, yeah, maybe science fascism is not a great idea. And of course, Thatcherism and Reagan being in charge really helped push even further into, okay, we can't really trust the people in charge to have our best interests. The CBP is a terrible choice if that is something you want to engage with, because it is simultaneously a completely ineffectual organization in the fact that it lives in a world where there are 2 homicides a year, and a completely corrupt organization, which means that this organization is very corrupt for extremely low stakes.
See, all right, speaking specifically for the show, not so much from the cyberpunk perspective of it, CBP is not corrupt from what we've seen. CBP is ineffectual, and
Well,
our
right,
only
sorry.
viewpoints into it are going to be the chief who attempts to slow down Recall, that is a corrupt organization where they try to come and take the kid, or in like Human Farv. And even Callie, who is antagonistic to them, is still on their side and is hasn't done he did an illegal act by letting Hume keep the gun in their environment, but then we get to see the gun as the reason that Hume was able to do X or Y and stop androids and yada yada yada. So it goes
Right,
back once again, re-showing this organization to be our heroic organization, even though pretty much all law enforcement in America comes from enslaved catchers. Just want to drop that note
right.
in for people that were unsure about that.
Right. Well, I mean, talking about the show specifically, we have this weird thing where they're trying to restructure the show so it doesn't engage with that. And by the way they did it, ended up nothing but reinforcing that exact problem as we talked about.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a monumental failure. But like the other things is like the multiculturalism. That's another piece is that a lot of cyberpunk fiction breaks down the barriers between national identities. So to go back to the Gernsback continuum, um, I believe the woman who hires the photographer is German, and I believe the photographer is British, and then they're going to America to take pictures of American architecture. So the idea is to show that how these influences have started to cross different cultural lines and country lines.
Based on the so I've never read it. I have
Right,
no reference points at all for the story.
right.
But based on what you're saying, does that mean that the prisoner is first wave cyberpunk or second wave because it's
Uh,
a corrupt government?
I would say it is not cyberpunk per se, but certainly I would say that there is a direct line from the prisoner to the stories that then led to cyberpunk. So it is maybe one step
So
removed, maybe zero wave, I suppose.
why would it not be cyberpunk? Now I find this fascinating. Why would it not be cyberpunk?
Um, so let me finish my initial thought, but then I'll want you to address that.
Okay.
Um, so the multicultural components of cyberpunk, all of these shows we've talked about have tried to address it in some way, shape, or form to extremely mixed success. Um, Max Headroom, I would lump in the same bucket as 27 in the sense of their multiculturalism was extremely perfunctory and more or less accounted to basically let's hire some people of color for a weekends to march them on camera, right?
Mhm.
So that aside, um, for me, uh, 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 it's funny. I've never thought about the prisoner as part of this until now. I certainly see that there is a connection there. But one of the other pieces of cyberpunk is to take radical sci-fi concepts and bring them into a very real world. It is in some ways we're I feel like this could be a long lecture of art theory, but it is some ways connected to magical realism in that regard. The magical realism genre is basically let's take really surreal concepts and bring them down to earth as hard as possible. One of the most iconic stories is A Man with Enormous Wings, which is just about two kids find a guy with enormous wings, and the fact that he has enormous wings is never addressed. Why he has enormous wings never talked about, but the fact that he is crash landed and they're trying to take care of him, and this old man is hurt, is the part of the story. But he also happens to have giant wings. That's magical realism. Cyberpunk kind of the same way. It's like let's take concepts like false memories and uh, baroque weaponry and artificial life forms and put them in a way that coexists with very mundane concerns like trying to get a job and trying to stay alive. Um,
You realize you're still describing the prisoner, right?
well, yes, but let's look at okay. So Blade Runner is ultimately about a blue collar cop who's trying to do his job. Unfortunately, his job sucks because it involves murdering people and how he struggles with that. While in that, where everything's like all their comedies and whatnot, the prisoner is about an international super spy who has his own apartment and a hand built sports car that is taken to an exotic island that may be in Wales. It's probably in Wales, maybe not in Wales, where he gets to
You've got a
luxuriate while also
guy
being tortured and tormented.
you've got a guy who, regardless of his super cool car, that hates his job. Decker hates his job.
Sure.
Wants to
Yeah.
quit. Decker wants to quit. Who is then kidnapped into a mission. Deckard's forced into a mission,
Right.
and who undergoes like psychological tortures. They're duplicate body duplicates. There's giant floating balls of like sci-fi stuff floating around that captures him. It's almost sentient, and
Right.
it has almost every single trope of cyberpunk.
I agree it has all the tropes. The thing it is lacking is that it the prisoner not only does not attempt to try to ground these into a understandable human experience, but luxuriates in completely subverting that exact concept. Like the prisoner cares not if you understand what it's all about. It doesn't try to make you and arguably the 2009 prisoner, which I've not watched much of, but one of the reasons why it fails is because it is trying to ground all this bizarre stuff into something that's understandable for people, and that's one of the reasons why it fails because that's not what the prisoner's doing. About it. The prisoner is surrealism. It's not magical realism in that regard. Now, but all of this saying, you're right. There is a there's a line that goes from Blade Runner to The Prisoner. I'm just saying that my arbitrary where Cyberpunk cuts off, I don't believe that The Prisoner falls into that arbitrary line that I have drawn because like all punk genres, at the end of the day, where you draw the lines are intensely personal and things that you will fight about to the death because that is how punk works.
I agree. I cannot defeat your arbitrary line. I could probably badger it for a long time, but I'll let
Right.
it go. I'm gonna put my own assertion. The prisoner now counts as cyberpunk for me.
I can certainly see someone taking the plots of The Prisoner and shoving them into a cyberpunk world and it working reasonably well. I absolutely can see that because you're right. There's a lot of overlap in those concepts. Um, I mean, I remember the original, and this is a deep pull that only you probably will recognize. Nobody else will recognize. The GURPS source book for The Prisoner.
Oh
Um,
my god.
actually, one of the suggestions is how to make it cyberpunk is that basically make all of the village a virtual reality.
Yeah.
And that works really well. And that basically the entire village is a corporation has put together the village virtual reality in order to strip secrets out of people so that they can then monetize them. It's like, yeah, that works really well.
So I'm just saying it. Who would have thought that when we that when I arbitrarily decided we should do a Prisoner and Twin Peaks mashup, it would keep coming back throughout the run of the show, having relevance for stuff that we're doing.
Right. But I think, since this is a wrap up, I'm happy to go this digression. This continues to reinforce our overall objective with the podcast, right? Is that I have an arbitrary line, your arbitrary line is different, which means genre is bullshit, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the cyberpunk genre is bullshit. The surrealism genre is bullshit. Magical realism is bullshit because they so overlap. You can take something like Tw- Twin Peaks and make a cogent, if not necessarily coherent, argument that Twin Peaks is cyberpunk. It's not, but is it?
That as much as I love David Lynch's work, I can't even bring myself to make that argument. I can do it for The Prisoner because it follows enough of the beats to make that a logical thing. For the Twin Peaks, I can't do it.
Right. M- my half attempt at the cogent argument, I've actually done plotted out to make it more cohesive. But is that there's also a fair amount of soap opera in cyberpunk. It's not prevalent, but it is there that I could unearth that, tap it to this soap opera of Twin Peaks and start to meld those together more. I could go that route. I don't want to because it's a ludicrous argument. Um, but this is
Oh,
why I jokingly, half jokingly, argue that things like Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century, right? It's like I keep bringing it up. It's a terrible show. We probably won't watch it because I don't want to subject Chris to it. Um, but ultimately, it is about Sherlock Holmes. The premise of the show is fantastic. Sherlock Holmes is preserved in royal jelly for 200 years, is resurrected to defeat Moriarty, who is a clone of the original Moriarty, because no one learned anything from Jurassic Park. Whereas the descendant of Lestrade, who is now part of New Scotland Yard in New London, has brought them back. And because Holmes needs a Watson, they literally feed all of the canonical stories of Sherlock Holmes, which exist in this world, into a robot who then goes crazy and thinks that he is Watson. Right? This show is bonkers. It's ludicrous.
what year did that show come out?
Mid 90s.
So a total digression now, because I think that's all we're doing this episode. I'm curious if Seth Rogen, is that the right Seth? He's a guy that's making the studio right now, which if you're not watching the studio, fucking
Okay.
fantastic. Um, which he has a movie that he called it was on HBO and it was called like Pickle or something. And he was a guy working in a pickle factory in like the 1910s, fell into a jar like a vat of pickle juice, and it preserved him for 100 years. And he came out. So I'm curious if he watched that show and went, "Oh, I could make a comedy about that." It's about that guy coming like 100 years later, after from being out preserved in pickle juice.
Right. Well, I mean, but one of the things that's interesting about 22nd century is the idea that um, Holmes is applying old school deduction methods to a society, so he's constantly having to learn about technology, and the technology is just hand wavy plot oriented bullshit, right? The whole every episode is just like, we're going to be on the moon because it'll be cool to have Hound the Baskervilles on the moon, right? It's nonsense. But the fact that they are on the moon plays a part into the solving of the mystery. So it's walking up to the aesthetics of cyberpunk while absolutely and manifestly refusing to engage in themes. It is no way, shape, or form a cyberpunk show in terms of themes. But you watch this show and you go, someone watched Blade Runner. You know, I mean, someone watched these cyberpunk things and said, "But we could do a Sherlock Holmes show with this." And it's like, how, right? And so that's what's so fascinating for me about cyberpunk is that it's a bit like a western in the sense that it's not. It is a genre, but also has a set of signifiers that anyone can use to tell a radically different story that people still look at and go, "Oh, that's this thing."
Yeah, I can absolutely see that now.
Mhm.
Hmm. Ridiculous. I love it.
Right.
Um, any other thoughts as we're wrapping this up? We've come a long way to get here. I've actually pulled a whole new series that we have to do now based on this conversation, so I hope you're happy with yourself. 2 series, actually, I think.
What series did I have you pull?
One of which that I'll only mention now, the other I'm gonna save and surprise you with when you're not expecting it, is our '90s cartoon run.
Oh,
We're
right.
gonna finally just have to buckle down and do it because we keep talking about it. And they may not be a coherent line through it because it's gonna have your Sherlock because 'cause you've talked about it so much. It's gonna have, like, Pirates of Dark Water in there and some
Oh,
other things
yeah.
that I'm mulling over.
I mean, Batman animated series, we talked about, yeah, things the X-Men animated series.
Yeah, so it might be 2 different ones of it because that sounds more like a '90s superhero run versus,
To be
like,
fair,
just a
yeah,
'90s.
there's so many '90s superhero cartoons that they will all be their distinct thing as opposed to just more the tail end of toy-driven cartoon shows.
Yeah, because like, right now I have, like, talking on air, 3 distinctive '90s runs, like the superhero one, the Pirates of Dark Water that slots into with some other stuff because I wanna cover that. But for the '90s, like, cyberpunk-esque one, potentially Brave Star, your Sherlock, and a couple of other ones like that.
Yeah,
Maybe
there was
even
another
Silverhawks, but I gotta think about that one a little bit more.
there was a, there's another, French show from the '90s that I've not watched, people keep recommending it to me, the name escapes me, but basically it's about a guy who dresses up as a woman in a long trench coat and as a vigilante, and there's very kind of Dark City vibes about the whole thing from what I've seen. So yeah, there's quite a few options.
So, hope you're happy with yourself. All you do is give me
Yes.
ideas for more shows, so, like, we're an Ouroboros, we keep eating our tail and keep coming back.
We'll never get to it, it's fine.
I've enjoyed this ride. I'm surprised in one aspect because I knew that I would like watching Blade Runner again and hearing your thoughts on Blade Runner,
Mhm.
simply because your knowledge and depth of cyberpunk is a lot deeper than mine is. I have kind of like a mid-range knowledge, but yours is like thorough, which has been great for me. And I've learned some stuff and have some books I want to pick up and read up on now. So that was fascinating. And
Excellent.
getting to go back and rewatch Akira that I hadn't seen in like 20 odd years was
Mhm.
fun and disturbing.
Yeah, awesome. I've been enjoying it too because, I like analyzing this stuff because so many times, particularly with these smaller genres, because you find lots of people talk about superheroes and fantasy and whatnot, but some of these smaller genres, it's nice to dig into because not many people want to talk about them, and there's lots of flavor and nuance in them. Uh, uh, but I mean, there's also great things you do in the bigger spaces too. So yeah, it's fun to kind of just take a little slice, like we did with the Prisoner Lynch run. You know, I mean, those are two things that wouldn't have thought to put together and say, oh, there's actually a tiny little micro genre of
I
sci-fi
told you.
surrealism. Yeah, that was really worth digging into. So this is I see this as kind of a kin. So what are we going to talk
Any other
about next time?
thoughts? So no final thoughts on Cyberpunk. You're feel good. You feel completed for right now.
I will never need to speak of it again.
All right. I'm gonna hold you to that.
That's not true,
So
but
the reason Eddie wants me to say what's next is 'cause I've thrown out like 4 different ideas, so he doesn't know which one we're really gonna do. And if I say it on air, he thinks that I'll hold to it.
I hope so.
Maybe. So something else that we've talked about a lot that we keep beating around the bush and saying we're eventually going to do. We're going to do a moderate sized James Bond run. We're not going to cover every single movie or anything like that. We're each going to select a movie from the main ones, and then each of us will pick one of the smaller Bond movies too. So I think the first one we're going to start with is going to be From Russia with Love that Eddie's going to cover.
Yep, yep. And we're gonna try to cover them in chronological order, because it'd be good, but kind of like we did with the Sherlock Holmes run in a shorter thing. It's like talk about a character as it evolves and how different actors approach that same character and whatnot. So I think there'll be some tonal resonances with how we did the Sherlock Holmes run, but I think it'll be fun. We should say up front, it's gonna be a lot of racism and sexism in these movies, so
Whew,
buckle up for
a
that.
whole lot.
just
And
be ready.
we we may talk about it during From Rush with Love, but I don't think it's gonna be something that we'll talk about every single episode.
No, 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 no.
So,
I think it's something we would do in the initial intro, and then just take it as read unless it's really egregious, although we did try to avoid the really egregious Bond movies.
yeah. Like, I think I can say with certainty we'll not be covering a certain Roger Moore film.
You don't wanna talk about voodoo?
I do not. Not at all. Eddie, if people are looking to follow you and talk to you about Cyberpunk, or when James Bond became Cyberpunk, where could they do that?
The sad part is I could make an argument for at least one of the Bond movies. But you can find me on Blue Sky as pugsteady.com. That's also my website. Um, if you're interested in Cyberpunk, Chris and I have both worked on Cyberpunk Red books. I've worked on Tales of the Reds, Hope Reborn. I've also worked on a Cyberpunk game for the Trinity Continuum called Trinity Continuum Anima. So if you're interested in my very different takes on Cyberpunk, those are two good ways to check it out. How about you?
I've worked on, I want to say, 5 Cyberpunk Red books, so you'll have to go track them all down. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head right now. I could say Danger Girl Dossier, Tales of the Red,
Street Stories.
uh, Street Stories, and like 2 others that elude me at the moment.
Right.
So that's my Cyberpunk work. And if you're not supporting Artelliser Games, who do amazing stuff, you should go out and buy the Cyberpunk set. Then you should go and tell them that you want them to make Castle Falkenstein 2.0
Yes.
so
Ah,
that
Castle
they can
Falkenstein.
hire Eddie and I to work on that. And so you only want it if both
Yes.
Spivey and Webb work on it.
Correct. Correct. It must be a team. Team or nobody, except
Uh,
for
um, just our book at that point, though.
right.
So if you're looking to find me online, it's darker underscore hue on Blue Sky. Otherwise, jump in Discord.
All right, and then we'll be seeing you.